1 week season. 1 week season.
1 week season, fam, La Familia. Welcome back. Today is Thursday, December 21st. You're probably watching this on Friday, the 22nd, or this weekend. Merry Christmas to you all. Mike Johnson here, M Johnson 86. Excited for week 16. We only have 3 weeks left in the NFL season. Wild to think about. Feels like we just were getting started watching that Chiefs-Lions opening night game. Feels like it was just yesterday, but you know, the fall flies quickly. Today is technically the first day of winter. So winter is coming. Winter is here. And here with winter to bring good tidings. Maximus, how we doing today?
Merry Christmas. Happy holidays, Mike, and everybody watching. Another small slate this week, which I prefer. So interesting, only 9 games. So it'll be interesting to see how that shapes up.
Yeah, my wife is currently in the process of writing a strongly worded letter to Mr. Roger Goodell regarding the NFL scheduling for this weekend with Christmas Eve and Christmas falling on a Sunday, Monday. I know it happened a couple of years, like 3, 4 years ago, maybe. And they kind of went the other way with it. I think they had like a big slate on the 23rd, and then they just had like 2 or 3 games on Christmas Eve. But this year they just said, your families belong to us now. And 2 games on Saturday, full slate, 9 games on Sunday, plus actually 10 games on Sunday if you include the Sunday night game. And then a full 3-game slate on Monday, which we will have content for every slate on 1 week season, of course. But yeah, the result is a 9-game slate, which, like you said, I kind of like those little bit smaller slates. I think it becomes it naturally condenses the player pool, which is something we always talk about trying to do. So it makes that a little bit easier. And you know, something JM talks about a lot is it forces plays. Sometimes it'll force chalky plays to be even chalkier than they should be. You know, it'll push some plays into that like a little bit higher ownership range. You know, when you have 12, 13 games on a slate, it kind of saves the field from itself in some cases where, you know, ownership stays spread out enough. But it just creates a lot more opportunities for leverage, I feel like, on these like 9, 10 game slates.
Yeah, and what's already kind of concentrated, you can focus on being even more concentrated in some ways, and kind of, you know, maybe inherently feel more confident what you finally land on as you're doing your final building. So
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and that's the thing is like, whichever way you go with it, you can lean even harder into it. Like if there's a play who's going to have higher ownership, but you're really, really feeling strong about it, you can take that hard stance, and there's less competition or less other pieces to where it's like, oh, if I take this strong stand on this one piece on a 13-game slate, say it's at quarterback, well, there's 25 other quarterbacks who have the opportunity to make you really pay for that wrong decision. Whereas, you know, on a slate like this, if there's a quarterback you feel really strongly about, even if he ends up 15, 20% owned, you know, that you've got, there's already, I was going through the games for my edge write-ups, and, you know, there's 18 teams, and I think 10 of them will not be starting like the quarterback they intended to start. So, you know, naturally you pretty quickly can kind of whittle things down. You know, if you start looking at things like that. So there's, I guess, less competition or less worry about. Normally, if you had 25 other quarterbacks, there might be 18 of them who, have a big ceiling. Their ceiling outcome could really bury you. So it's a little less comfortable. So on both ends of it, I think the smaller slates provide a lot of opportunity, to kind of leverage it. Strong stances both ways.
Yeah, you could definitely capitalize on your strategy and more angles or concentration to separate yourself from the mistakes the field may make on a slate of this size. If you kind of stick to your guns of your process and your strategy, and the slate's kind of doing some of the work for you, like kind of what you said, where you're kind of already in a concentrated mode going into it. So.
Right. So with that said, we will get into your practice build for this week. We are on Fanduel, of course. This week, you're back to the Sunday NFL touchdown, the $65 5-entry max tournament. Looks like it's a $20,000 prize pool this week. Only 349 entries, so a little bit smaller. But again, pays out 84 positions, which is, if my math serves me right, that's right around 25%, right at 25%.
Yeah. Kind of back to now, which is good.
Yeah, and $4,000 the first, $2,000 the second, $1,000 the first. So, relatively even breakdown. If you end up one of those top places, it's not that huge. Like that's the one thing on FanDuel is some of their tournaments, it'll be like $100,000 the first and like 15 grand a second, where it's like just this ridiculous difference. So kind of a flatter payout structure at the top. And like we've talked about before, you're paying out, it's just a shade under 2x your entry fee if you place one of these teams. So, it's a nice structure. Glad to see it is back to, a more appealing structure this week after last week they kind of futzed with it.
Yeah, I don't know what they were doing. Last week was they lowered the top prize by 1,000. They put up the amount of entries and then made the percentage of places paid like all the way down to 20%. So that was kind of odd. I actually went elsewhere last week. We covered one of the tournaments on the last week's show, and I slithered out a small profit. Definitely had some spots where, not to do the one player off thing, but one team in particular was basically Ayuk instead of Debo. And that would have, right team, the right offense, just as it is with the Niners, you don't exactly know which one of them, but except for maybe CMC has a pretty solid floor. But between the receivers and the tight end, they kind of trade off, it seems. So,
yeah, it's just where does it's like the defense is eventually going to break, and just like who do they make their mistake against? They left Debo wide open on that first touchdown, and then he made a really nice catch on the second one. It's just where do things break? They happen to break there this week. So,
and funny enough, where things break usually fluctuate their prices as well, because there was a time when Ayuk was much more expensive than Debo, and now it's like the other way around. Last week, so that's kind of interesting. But yeah, so we're going to do a quarterback and an offense. We haven't done it all in our show anyway this season so far, but I figure he's on a heater right now and seemingly in a good matchup. We're going to have to wait for information on the other side of the ball, but Baker Mayfield had the greatest game ever in your hometown last week. Career game, but he's kind of been, relatively solid throughout the year. And the Bucs relatively are concentrated as well in their offense. So in looking at the prices and looking at some of the game matchups, it kind of had me fall on Joe Flacco is another strong contender, but that I was kind of playing around with a very concentrated target tree that since he's been the quarterback, he's been targeting. But so here we have Baker Mayfield double stacked which basically, especially with FanDuel, if it's not a dual threat, if it's not a, premium, if you will, then you want to look to, especially in offense where you have concentrated targets, you want to look to double stack somebody like Baker. So in this case, I have him with Chris Godwin and Cade Otton at tight end. And then I have a Calvin Ridley bring back for the Jags. I absolutely love Ridley's price this week. And they're dropping like flies in Jacksonville on the receiver core. Obviously, no Christian Kirk, probably no Zay Jones. Kind of uncertainty on who that wide receiver 2 is. I mean, definitely Parker Washington is, he's around. And then you have Jamal Agnew. And then you have another guy, I think Tom Jones is his name.
Tim Jones.
So you're kind of getting thin behind Ridley. I think Ridley is a perfect stacking bring back in this situation, and his price is great to kind of, be able to have a balanced team. So that's kind of the 4 o'clock shell this week is Mayfield, Godwin, Otton, bring it back with Ridley. And then we have a skinny stack of Brandon Cooks and Tyreek Hill at the flex spot. I think Tyreek Hill is pretty much the ultimate flex player. Obviously monitor that he's playing. I think he's getting a veteran rest, and it seems like the Dolphins are just resting all their guys to make sure that they're ready for the Cowboys in a big game on Sunday. But nevertheless, got to monitor that. And then I have, as far as the 1 o'clock players here, it just so happens the running back core is that this week. Chuba Hubbard. The con with Hubbard would be it's a low-scoring point spread, a low-scoring team total. However, it is very rare at this time of year that you always want to try to identify lead backs that are not splitting the backfield, and he definitely falls under one of those amazingly. He has averaged over 20 rushing attempts 3 weeks in a row, and he actually gets targeted a little bit too. So at 6,400, he kind of fit in. I kind of did the running backs last on this team, kind of started with the quarterback shell. Want to get exposure to that Dolphins-Cowboys game that, obviously has the highest point spread and team totals on the slate. But Hubbard, again, being a lead back at this stage in the league, at this stage of the year, and not splitting carries is something, if you can get at a value, that's, it's a good fit there. And then conversely, Devin Singletary, who absolutely just went bonkers last week. Unfortunately, it looks like no CJ Stroud again. So I could definitely see a scenario where Singletary, another one who he's definitely established himself as the lead back in Houston. I think Dameon Pierce is becoming more of an afterthought now. But and he's another one who is a pass catching running back. He does run between the tackles some. 6,200. Great prices on these running backs, in my opinion. And they kind of fit the mold in filling out the team here to the shell that I created. And then the Jets defense. On FanDuel, like we've talked about a lot of times this year, great strategy to pay up for defense on FanDuel. The pricing is looser. But in this case, it kind of checks. The check mark is a double fold with the Jets because, A, they're playing against a bad quarterback. I saw Ron Rivera report that I guess they're going to start Sam Howell again this week instead of Brissett. If it was actually Brissett, I'd be a little more, because he's actually more of a disciplined quarterback. But with Sam Howell, A, bad quarterback, B, an offense that passes the ball a lot, you're getting the best of both worlds with the Jets defense. And they are the highest priced defense on the slate. But as a result of that, there's a possibility I may lockbox them for my defense that I play, period, on all my teams potentially. Plus, that field in New York is so bad. I'm sure there'll be injuries at some point on that field that everybody complains about. So, they finish it out at 5,000. Now, one thing you can do in targeting the Bucs offense, there's a couple different ways, as always, that I like to cover with the pricing. If you want to take out Godwin, now Godwin, I think he's on the come up. He's been getting crazy targeted over the last 2 weeks. He's getting more deep targets than he had earlier in the season. However, if you want to go to the man, Mr. Mike Evans, You could easily do so. You can add him on another team. Remember, this is a 5-team. If you want to max out your team entries in this contest, you could go with Mike Evans instead of Godwin, and then you would take out Brandon Cooks and Tyreek Hill, and you can target 2 other players in games that you probably want exposure to. One would be Jordan Addison for the Vikings in that wide receiver spot. And then, as maddening as it sounds with Arthur Smith, I'm sorry, Bijan Robinson at $7,100. I mean, at home in a game that Atlanta has to win, you would hope that they would utilize Bijan Robinson the way that he should be. He should be, we talked about Singletary and Hubbard as the lead backs for their teams. Well, this guy should be the lead back for Atlanta, but unfortunately, it's a wait and see approach every week. But in this case, he makes sense in the flex spot to fill out if you wanted to go with Evans. In this case, it's a 1 o'clock flex because my shell is 4 o'clock with the Mayfield build. So there's another way to get Evans in. There's also ways you can do Rachaad White. You can add him. He's viable, I believe, to double stack with Baker and either Otten or Evans or Godwin. I have one here. If you did Mayfield and Rachaad White with Godwin, you could actually still get exposure to a Dolphin. You could put Jake Ferguson in the tight end spot, Jalen Waddle as a wide receiver, and that's a great skinny stack for the Dolphins-Cowboys game. Keep the Jets defense. You would put Josh Downs in the flex spot, especially if Pittman, is limited or isn't going to play. Downs would be a candidate to get some more volume than usual. And then you go up to let me see. You have instead of Hubbard, I think you would have Rachaad White, and then you could go Godwin. And that's another way to build because Rachaad White is another lead back, another guy you want to consider, much like Hubbard and Singletary. And then I think that works out price wise.
Yep.
And then yourself kind of a unique double stack with Baker that a lot of people, don't necessarily think to stack a running back with the quarterback. But in this case, Rachaad White's viable because he's a pass catching running back and he's the lead back. And then in this case, the Waddle Ferguson skinny, I love that as well for the exposure to that game. And so there's a couple different ways you can stack the Bucs this week in a game where you're talking about 2 pass funnel defenses in the Bucs and the Jags. Now, obviously, monitor the Trevor Lawrence news. If Lawrence doesn't play, probably brings it down a little bit in shootout potential. But if he does play, and it looks like he's kind of in that area of maybe just getting or kind of saving him from the news I've been reading to be ready.
Well, it's a concussion.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think he plays.
Really? You think so?
No.
You don't think he plays? Okay.
It's a brain injury.
Jaguars need to win.
Yeah, but when it's a concussion, it's all bets are off. I mean, the Texans needed to win last week and need to win this week, and Stroud's out. So
yep, that's true. I still like it because Mayfield.
Yeah, I think it's fine.
It's easier to pass against the Jaguars than to run against them.
Yeah, they are, both teams in this. So I have the NFL edge right up for this game.
Oh, do you? Okay, great.
Yeah, because it's a late window. So I always have all the late window games. So yeah, I mean, both of these teams are, these teams rank 5th and 6th in the NFL in opponent pass rate. So, opponents are on both sides are throwing the ball at these teams a lot. So I think it's definitely a situation where, obviously for this game to turn into a big shootout, probably it would be best if you had Trevor Lawrence playing, but it doesn't have to. Sometimes you can have, I think CJ Beathard, the backup, he's not great, but I think in a 1-game sample against the team that's their defense is a little beat up, he can, he can he can keep the ship afloat, but also sometimes like FanDuel's so touchdown heavy. If they struggle to move the ball or they turn the ball over a couple times, it could turn into a situation where the Bucs score a bunch of touchdowns, and it's FanDuel where touchdowns are huge. So, you know, Rashad White, like you talked about, he's got one of the, I mean, he's a bell cow. He's like the guy there. So
Love
just by playing Baker and White on the same roster, you kind of lock in all those Bucs touchdowns, which there's just a lot of value there, right? I mean, they're 15K total. If the Bucs score 4 touchdowns, you can relatively comfortably say that those 2 are going to be involved in all of them. And sometimes people get so worried about like, oh, is the, White caught a touchdown last week, which is very possible, but they could score 4 touchdowns. And if Mayfield throws 2 even and White runs 2, I mean, that still is 20 points just from the touchdowns, which is pretty valuable. So, I like this build. I like where your head's at with all of it.
Cool. I like it too. It just feels comfortable, which you don't ever want to feel too comfortable. But as of now, definitely targeting this as at least 1 or 2 of my 5 teams probably will be these Mayfield setups.
Yeah, and I think it's I wanted to touch on, you talked about Bijan Robinson. I think so he is
Great
like
price.
I feel like I'm caping for Arthur Smith here. Like last week makes sense. Like the game was, and I talked about this, like I've been on Bijan all year. I didn't play him at all last week because the weather, like that game was just so bad. And you've got, like, it was pretty clear to see you have Desmond Ridder and Bryce Young at quarterback, and the weather was going to be so bad with heavy rain, winds 20 miles an hour. I don't know if you saw like the pictures from the stadium. There was like 100 people there. So like it made sense that they weren't going to be able to throw. They're going to have to run a lot. Weather wasn't going to be great. And like, just speaking frankly, like the one thing is like Algier is like kind of the steadier guy, like better ball security and whatever. And Bijan actually did have like a very critical fumble. So like, not to like cape for Arthur Smith, but it kind of made sense that Bijan wasn't like getting a ton of work, and then was kind of justified, frankly, when he did fumble. But like looking at this week, like they're playing in a dome, the Colts games have taken off. And yeah, like, I mean, Arthur Smith is basically on his last leg. I think they have to win out and make the playoffs for him to keep his job. So, I think wheels off. I think Bijan has got to be, even someone as arrogant as Arthur Smith has got to see that, like, he has to win to keep his job, and Bijan Robinson is the best chance he has at that. So I love that play this week, and love that you brought him up. And then the other thing I wanted to talk about quickly is, you had Cooks and Tyreek in here.
Yeah, that was one of the teams. That was actually the first team.
Yeah. So that's what I was putting back, is with that initial team, you've got the core running backs there, Singletary and Hubbard from the early window, and you've got the Jets defense. The thing I like about that is the way that plays out. You've got 2 high volume running backs in the early window. So it gives you a wide range of outcomes in like a good way to get a lot of information from those early games. Both of those running backs, they're going to get enough volume and they're priced low enough where they're not going to like break you, especially in this tournament. Like probably low end outcome is like 8 to 10 points, which they're priced low enough where it doesn't kill you. But if one of them scores, if one of them has 15 points and the other one, scores 2 touchdowns, you look at like Singletary last week, he had 19 points without scoring a touchdown. So like if one of them were to have a 2 touchdown game and drop a 30 pointer, like you're in a great spot there with all that extra salary. Same with like the Jets, spending up a little for a lower owned defense. And we talk about it a lot on Fanduel, how just the pricing structure makes it a little bit more viable to pay up for those higher priced defenses, but they have such a big ceiling, right? You talked about Howell and how, the Commanders throw a lot. Howell, he got benched mid-game last week. This is a very good Jets defense. So you could be in a really good spot after the early games. And then having Tyreek in that initial build, I think Tyreek's, a great play, but it gives you so much flexibility because based on how those early games go, that's a big chunk of salary. So if you decided, based on what happened, if you felt like you needed to move around, or if there was some late news or late weather, you just have so much flexibility that you could play off of. So I really like how you did this build, and I like the options that it gives you as far as reacting, and we do talk a lot about late slate on this, but or late swap. And we talked earlier about the smaller size of the overall slate, but there's only 3 late window games and there's 6 early window games. So you have 2/3 of the information from the slate already in your back pocket if you want a late swap this week, which is kind of nice. You have the more information you have when you make a decision, the more optimal you can make based on the tournament you're playing in and what you're trying to accomplish. So, I really like where you're going with this one. I think you're on a good track here.
And to your point, all the 3 late games are all viable. I mean, you can easily swap over to Justin Fields, do a skinny with DJ Moore, Trey McBride run back maybe. I mean, you'd have the like you were saying, if you wanted to move around Tyreek Hill's salary, or even if you did this shell of a team on 2 or 3 teams. I mean, that gives you 2 or 3 different routes you can go, maybe based on how the early volume did or didn't do. And then the other thing was on the other team with Bijan, what I like about that as well is definitely I see if you're going to do the onesies, definitely put them in games that look like they're potential games that could explode. Atlanta, the Colts, they're always involved in these kind of games. To your point, they're in a dome, they're at home. I think Bijan will definitely be utilized more this week. And then Jordan Addison is a great piece to have in that Viking Lions game, which it's kind of hard to stack those teams, which is why I like the Buck stack here. But at the same time, you're probably going to want somebody from that game with a 47-point game total or spread so far, which I think it's definitely the highest in the early window, and I think it may be the second highest on the whole slate. The Vikings Lions, and Addison is a great example of somebody you can at a pretty good price that you can get exposure to that game if you for your 1 or 2 or 3 onesies that are not correlated with the correlation that I tried to create with the rest of the team. So so I love Bijan too this week. I had none of them last week too. It was definitely a terrible spot there. I still think Arthur Smith doesn't know what he's doing overall, but I see what you're saying with last week where it happenstance made sense.
Yeah. I mean, that's what it comes down to is, I guess, is like, I think that I think like Bijan's not going to be like unowned, but I also think like he probably should be like 40% owned here. But he won't be, just because it's so easy for people to say, Arthur Smith, like, he doesn't know what he's doing. But like, you look at the recent games, like you have that Carolina game where it's just a mess. Prior to that, you have the Tampa game where he had 10 rushes and 7 targets. But we just talked about how Tampa and Jacksonville. Tampa is one of the that like they get run on, or they're one of the harder run defenses. They're kind of a pass funnel. And then you look at the 3 games prior to that. He had 23 opportunities, 18 rushes, and 5 targets. 22 opportunities, 24 opportunities. So, I got to think that he's going to be pretty heavily involved this week. And I think that, you can just take advantage of the field kind of overplaying the Arthur Smith hate, I guess.
So a question I have for you then, Heineke, not Ritter. What does that make a difference in a positive or a negative for Bijan?
I mean, I don't think it makes that huge of a difference. I mean, he started 3 games, Tennessee, Minnesota, Arizona. It's such a small sample. I think on the whole, he's kind of a similar quarterback to Ritter. I mean, neither of them's a great quarterback, right? They're both semi-serviceable in short stints, but they also, can be, it can turn sideways pretty quick for both of them. Bijan didn't have like huge games, but also that was, that Arizona game, that was like Heineke's last start was the first game where Smith kind of saw the light and kind of was really rolling with Bijan. And he's been very involved other than last week since then. So, those 2 weeks prior to that were prior to the Falcons bye. Or those 3 weeks were prior to the Falcons bye. I don't think it's overly. I think Bijan's a great play this week, regardless. I guess that's not making or breaking based on who is the quarterback. So
maybe Heineke would help Drake London a little bit more if they get behind and they have to pass. But if Indianapolis kind of goes off and early on.
Yeah, it'll be interesting because there's been so many like Colts games that have been wild. Like they've just been a part of a lot of like crazy game environments.
In a dome too.
Yeah. So it'll be interesting how that all plays out. London, I'm trying to pull up his he actually, I think he missed a game in week 11. In week 9 he missed the game. But he had 2 games with Heineke. One was the game that Heineke came in mid-game. Didn't really do anything special, but yeah, I mean, either way, I think the Colts are kind of they're the straw that stirs that drink in that game environment. So we'll see how it plays out.
Right. One more quick note on the Bucs Jags. I have Ridley as the bring back. There is angles where you could make ETN the bring back as well as a pass catching running back. He's just a lot more in salary than Ridley, so I'd have to kind of adjust the team a little more drastically with ETN, but he is somebody worth mentioning, I guess, in your build if you are going to target that Bucs Jags game.
Mm-hmm.
Ridley is the alpha with the way the wide receiver core is, but ETN, maybe they'll call upon him a little bit more as a result of the thin wide receiver spot for the team this week, and figured I'd mention him as well in passing as a possible stacking bring back.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of news, lot going on, and got to try to keep your eye on the ball with the, a Saturday slate, all the family stuff people probably got going on. So definitely a lot to take in, but yeah, it should be fun. Should be a fun 3 days of football, family, and all that. So happy holidays to everyone. Thank you as always, Maximus, for joining us. We will see everyone next week for the Week 17 edition of Fanduel Labs. And yeah, like I said, happy holidays, everyone. Best of luck. See you at the leaderboards, hopefully every day this weekend. See you at the top of the leaderboards. Remember to like and subscribe, leave some comments, and we will see you next week.
1 week season.